My parents left me a dilapidated old house in a remote corner of Montana, while my younger brother, Spencer, inherited their well-kept home in Lincoln, Nebraska. My wife, Ellen, called me a weakling, said I never had the guts to stand up to Spencer, and she kicked me out of our place, telling me not to come back until I'd fought for what was fair. I drove to Montana with my heart heavy and my head full of questions, not knowing that this house, this lonely, creaking, wind-beaten house, would change everything. Hello, my name is Brooks Anderson. Oh no, I'm 42, a loan officer at a small bank branch in Lincoln. My life has always felt like a quiet river, steady, predictable, not much to write home about. If there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I'm not a man who enjoys making waves. I was raised to be agreeable, to yield when I could, and to keep my voice low. But now I'm standing in front of a crumbling house on a dirt road bordered by pale grasses and sun-bleached fence posts, holding a set of rusty keys that feel heavier than they look, and my heart is swirling with old doubts and new questions. I grew up in a middle-of-the-road neighborhood in Lincoln, the kind of place where every third house looks the same if you squint. My parents, William and Mary, were gentle, practical people. My dad was a mechanic, the kind who tried to save you money instead of the kind who tried to squeeze it out of you. My mom taught second grade and could calm a room of crying 7-year-olds like she'd been given a magic spell. They weren't big on hugging or lofty speeches, but I never doubted they loved Uzme and my little brother, Spencer. They taught us to be kind, to give, to share the better seat, and break the last cookie in half. Family first, they said always. There was one thing my parents didn't talk about much: our family's roots. The fragments I knew were borrowed from half-told stories about my great-grandfather being Lakota from the people who once roamed the Great Prairies. My grandfather, Joseph, kept a thread of that life in him, I guess. He worked on a ranch near the Bighorn Mountains, carried a quiet knowledge of the land, of seasons, and stars. But he died when I was small. After that, the stories thinned out. We were a Nebraska family, folks said. Nice. Normal. We didn't talk about being different. And yet I always had that flicker inside me, a question I couldn't quite name. Had dark eyes and thick black hair that curled in the back if I let it go too long. Sometimes I'd study my reflection and I'd feel a tug, a sense that there was a room in me I hadn't opened yet. I don't blame my parents for not talking. More about our heritage. They wanted us to have an easier path in a place where different was often misunderstood. But the not knowing lodged in me like a small pebble in a shoe. You ignore it for a while, and then one day, it's all you can feel with every step. Spencer was 4 years younger, and everything I wasn't. He was sunlight, a smile that drew people in, charm that arrived before he did. He wanted more, always more, and he didn't hesitate to take it. As kids, he gravitated toward the bigger piece of cake, the shinier toy. He swiped rides on bikes that weren't his until someone pointed a finger at him, and then he'd laugh and return it with a wink. I made room for him because that's what older brothers do, or that's what I told myself. In our house, fairness often meant Spencer went first, and I adjusted. I never called it unfair. I didn't call it anything at all. Then, last winter, my father's cough turned sharp and didn't let go. Mom's steps became small. The light dimmed in their house. They both passed too close together, like a sequence of lights in a row going out. Funeral casseroles lined our counter. The bank felt smaller. Ellen started using the word weak more often in a way that felt like she was biting into it. The will was read in a lawyer's office where everything smelled like dust and lemon-scented cleaner. It was just me, Spencer, and the lawyer, Mr. Wilkins. A soft-voiced man with framed photos of fishing trips and grandkids on his desk. My parents' voices arrived on paper. Spencer got their house in Lincoln, the one with Mom's hummingbird. Fida and Dad's collection of wrenches organized in that blue cabinet he adored. And me? I got an old property in a rundown house in Montana, near where my grandfather had worked the land. A place so far off the highway the lawyer had to squint at the map to find it. For a long second, I just stared at the floor. Spencer nodded like it was no surprise to him, though I knew no one had been told. His mouth tightened in a way I recognized. He was calculating, tallying numbers I didn't even know were there, and he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Brooks, Montana's pretty. You can put antlers on the walls." His laugh was light, breezy. Maybe he meant no harm. Maybe he couldn't help himself. That night, Ellen's eyes were bright and cold. "They gave him their house," she said, pacing our kitchen as if the room were shrinking. "All the equity, all the stability, and you get a shack in nowhere." I tried to reason with her, told her it was probably fair in some way we didn't see yet. She stared at me like I had grown a second head. "You're going to let this slide, aren't you? You always do." When I stayed quiet, when I said, "I needed time to process it all," she threw out the words that would push me farther than I realized. "You're weak, Brooks. Go to Montana, figure yourself out, and don't come home until you've learned how to stand up for yourself." I didn't slam the door when I left, though maybe I should have. I packed a bag with more neatness than anger, slid a photo of my parents into the side pocket, and got into my 11-year-old Subaru with the briefcase trunk rattle. I texted Spencer I was heading west for a few days to look at the house, and he sent a thumbs up and a bicep emoji, as if it were a joke, as if I were going to a game. The highway west unspooled beneath me-flat cornfields giving way to rolling grasslands, then the shoulders of Wyoming rising in the distance like a promise. I drove past billboards advertising steakhouses and fireworks and skydiving, past gas stations with bathrooms that smelled like bleach and sage. The sky widened until it felt like another sea, blue and endless. By the time I crossed into Montana, the air felt cleaner, sharper somehow. I could see far in every direction, which made me feel small and honest. The dirt road to the house was more memory than road 2. Faint ruts through yellowed grass and a wind that combed the blades one way, then the other. The house stood at the end of it like an old man who had fallen asleep sitting up. The paint was faded to a dull gray white, with strips peeled off like old wallpaper. A porch held itself together from habit. Cottonwoods, leaves flickering like coins, stood guard along a creek I could hear more than see. I cut the engine and heard a bird call, then silence. I stepped onto the porch, and the board under my foot complained. The key was old and stiff, and it took a minute of jiggling before the lock surrendered with a wheeze. The smell inside was the kind that only old houses keep, a mix of dry wood, dust, and something like time itself. The afternoon light came, and slanted through grime on the windows, turned gold by distance. There were spider webs in the corners, and a coat rack by the door holding a single cap. Sun faded to a gray that had once been blue. I walked in and the floor gave a little butt held. And then I saw what made my breath catch. On the far wall of the main room, above a battered sofa and a low shelf, hung a quilt in the morning star pattern. Deep blues and reds fading to pale yellow at the aegis. Star blossoming out from the center. It was beautiful in a way that felt like it had been waiting. For me, beside it, carefully arranged, were photographs in a grid, black and white faces, sepia paper, edges curled. My grandfather, as a young man, eyes direct and thoughtful. A woman beside him, whose gaze was frank and kind. Men on horses, women standing. Near a tent, children whose smiles looked like mine at 8 or 9. Written in careful pencil beneath some of the photos were names I didn't know. A note in the corner, small and deliberate, said, "For the one who listens." For a moment I stood very still, as if any loud movement might erase what I was seeing. My chest tightened. The part of me that had slept most of my life lifted its head. I felt stunned not simply because there were photographs and quilt objects can be collected, but because of the feeling that threaded between them. This wasn't a random display. This was a story, a map through time that someone had created for me to find. I didn't speak. I didn't reach out yet. I walked through the main room into the kitchen, where the sink was clean, as if someone had wiped it before leaving decades ago. Pots hung from 2 hooks. The wood stove sat like a dark animal in the corner. A small wooden box sat on the table, with a silver dollar on top like a paperweight. The dollar bore an eagle that had seen better days. Beneath it, Written in my father's blocky printing was my name, Brooks. I sat down. The chair wobbled. I steadied it with my foot, reached for the box, and lifted the lid. Inside were envelopes wrapped with string, a brass key, a folded map, and a note card with my father's handwriting. "Son," it began, "if you're reading this, you found the house. There are two things you need to know. First, we left this place to you because your grandfather wanted it for the one who would listen. I think that's you. Second, this place is more than it looks. Look close. Trust your instincts. Call Mr. Wilkins if you need help. He knows more than he said in his office. We didn't want to overwhelm you, of Dad." The next envelope was brittle with age and addressed in an older hand to Joseph's first grandson. That was me. My fingers paused. I looked around the silent kitchen as if my grandfather might be watching and nodded to the air without meaning to. I opened it carefully and slid out several pages that smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. "Brooks," the letter began. The handwriting was strong, the letters marching in straight lines with only a little wavering at the edges. "If it is you, if the timing is right, you will be the one to unlock what I could not say outright. I learned to keep quiet and to carry things that should have been shared. I don't want you to carry the same weight. The house is old, but the land is older. You did not inherit a building. You inherited a promise. There are people to whom this place matters, and people who will tell you it does not. You will know who is who if you are patient. If your life has been quiet, it is because you were walking like water. That was a good thing. It is time to become a river that knows where it is going." I swallowed, read on. "In the pantry, there is a loose board. Lift it. Use the brass key. Be careful with what you find. Talk to the right people. You will. Know them by the look in their eyes. They will look at the land first, and then at you. Take care and be steady. Joseph." I put the pages down and felt something like a sob catch in my throat before I swallowed it. I was alone in a house. That had been waiting for me. The quiet that had defined me felt different now. It didn't feel like absence. It felt like a kind of listening I'd been doing without knowing. I stood slowly and walked to the pantry. It was just a narrow space with shelves holding old mason jars and a jar of buttons and a bag of flour as firm as a brick. Crouched. Ran my hand along the floor and felt the shallow give of a plank that wasn't set quite right. I pressed. It lifted a fraction. I slid my fingers under and carefully pried it up. Beneath the board was a keyhole fitted into a small iron plate. Nearly black with time, I went back and retrieved the brass key from the box. My hand shook a little as I put it in, turned, and heard a soft click. The iron plate swung back, revealing a recessed handle. I pulled, and a wood panel lifted, bringing a square of dust and the smell of earth. Below, a short stair into a small cellar. The cellar was not large. It was cool and smelled like damp. Wood and pennies. There was a trunk-a-reel, old-fashioned trunk with metal corners and leather straps, scarred and dignified, as if it had crossed a continent on a wagon. On top of the trunk was a wrapped bundle. I set it aside and opened the lid. Inside the trunk were items that made the air feel dense photographs. Letters tied with twine, a ledger book with numbers in the margins, a small stacked tin that rattled softly, a rolled-up map with edges worn and soft. I lifted the map and unrolled it carefully on the floor. It was the county map with parcels marked in ink. The parcel where I stood was not just a square with a house. It was a wide rectangle that stretched across the creek, up a shallow hill, and out to a stand of cottonwoods. The acreage figure in the corner made me blink. 480 acres. For a long minute, I just stared. This old house sat on land that was not a couple of acres and a fence. This was half a section of place big enough to get lost on. My father had said, "This place is more than it looks." He meant it literally. I thumbed through the ledger book next, and found notes in my father's hand and earlier in my grandfather's. Dates, weather, calves born on neighboring ranches, the year the creek froze early and cracked like breaking glass. Tucked into a pocket at the back were papers I recognized from bank work deeds, a quiet title case, tax receipts, a conservancy literature piece from the 80s, and a plain envelope labeled for Brooks Financial. Inside were old savings, bonds, a lot of them crisp, but aged like they'd been put away for a long time. Some were in my grandfather's name, then exchanged into my father's, with a note that they were to be redeemed by me. My banker's brain did quick math without me asking it to, and I felt heat rise at the base of my neck. Even at a conservative estimate, this was more money than I had ever personally held. I set the bonds back gently. I opened the rattling tin. Inside were pieces of turquoise, a harmonica, a small carved bird, and a key stamped with a number. Generations of someone's pockets. I went back upstairs and sat in the kitchen chair again. The house creaked like an old friend settling in, and outside the wind braided itself through the grass and cottonwoods. The morning star quilt watched. From the other room, like a kind of compass, steady and quiet, I turned my father's note card in my hands. He must have known I'd find all this, must have kept the secret because he and Mom wanted me to find it without Spencer or Ellen, or anyone else in the room breathing down my neck. I exhaled, long and slow. When night came, it arrived all at once, like the switching off of a stage light. I pulled aside the faded curtain and looked out at a sky that was so full of stars I felt dizzy. You forget how many there are until you stand under them with no streetlight in sight. The Milky Way was a path overhead, a river of light that looked like it was going somewhere north of town. I lay down on the sofa, wrapped my coat around me, and slept like a man holding a secret he doesn't fully understand yet. The next morning, I drove into the nearest town, a place that looked like a postcard if postcards had fewer people, a diner with a neon sign, a hardware store with a bell above the door, a feedlot, and a county building with a gray dome that looked out of place among the low roofs. A woman at the registrar's desk, Doris, according to her nameplate, pulled my parcel file after I slid my father's letter across to her and explained who I was. She peered at me over her glasses with that practiced efficiency of people who had seen a lot and weren't surprised by anything. "You're the Anderson boy," she said, and I nodded. "Well, your grandfather used to come in with dried mud on his boots and a smile. We didn't see much. He never talked my ear off. But he got done what needed to get done. Haven't seen anyone on that place regular in a long time. Told her I was trying to understand what I had inherited. She raised an eyebrow at what and slid me a photocopy of the boundary lines. The legal description that sounded like poetry written by a surveyor and a lawyer. She tapped a finger against a stamp from 40 years ago. "Your grandfather kept this from going to tax sale by the skin of his teeth one year," she said. "Your father paid it forward after that, kept it quiet." Some folks sniffed around. "Back in the late 90s, when a developer was trying to scoop up chunks up to the flats, your dad told them no. Didn't want to sell? Do you know who?" I asked. She checked a file and read a name that would come back into my life later. "Beck Holdings," she said. "Guy named Royce, slick talker, city boots." My phone buzzed as if it knew an old ghost had been named. It was Spencer. "How's the shack, bro?" he said. I could hear traffic on his end. "Find a moose in the kitchen?" "Funny," I said, and it came out calmer than I expected. "There's more here than I thought." "Sell it," he said breezily. "Get yourself something nice. In town, we could use some cash to do the floors at Mom and Dad's. I'm thinking that wide plank look." The Audrey at Doris's desk glanced at me, not listening, but somehow listening. "It's not that simple," I said. He sighed dramatically. "It never is with you. Look, I've got a contractor coming by. If you want your share when we sell the Lincoln house, we need to do some work. I don't want your charity case, Montana. Project to drain your attention." I didn't answer, and something in the silence made him change tone. "Hey," he said more softly. "I know you were Mom's favorite in the quiet way. I was Dad's favorite. We all knew it. But that house, man, that house is my life. Please don't make this complicated." Could have asked him what he meant, how the house was his life, what debt or secret he was wrapping in those words. But I didn't. "Not then. I'll call you later," I said, and hung up. I found a hardware store and bought basics. A broom. Heavy duty. Trash bags. A pry bar. Some rope. The man at the counter had a mustache that belonged in a different century, and he nodded when I told him where I was staying. "That place is a good place," he said. "Needs a friend." Back at the house, I started with the small things. I swept. I opened windows that stuck like a stubborn jaw. I propped the front door open and let fresh air edge out the old. And then I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. I sat on the floor in front of the quilt and the photographs and tried to match names to faces out loud. "Grandfather Joseph," I said softly. "Maybe that's your sister or your aunt." I traced the line of a cheekbone that looked a little like mine. I made a simple dinner on the stove beans, toast and apple, and realized I liked the hunger that came after work, you could see. I slept again on the sofa, and in the morning, I woke to a sound like someone stepping onto the porch. I held my breath. A shadow passed the window. The door creaked softly. I stood and turned around, heart flickering like a nervous horse. A dog stood in the entryway, head tilted, ears up. He was the color of dust and wheat, with a white patch on his chest and a wiry tail that swayed in hopeful arcs. He looked at me as if we'd agreed to meet and were late. "Hey there," I said, and he blinked like he understood English. He stepped cautiously forward and sniffed the air near my hand. "You lost?" He looked not lost so much as partially wild and fully at ease. I found a bowl, filled it with water, set it down. He drank like a polite diner without slurping, let me scratch the stool of his ear. Then, business done, he walked to the hearth, turned in a circle, and lay down with a sigh that sounded exactly like a commitment. "Well," I said to the dog who now lived with me, "I guess you're Ranger." Ranger followed me around the house and then the land as I explored. I walked to the creek where water ran clear over small stones. Cottonwoods clapped their leaves together in a light wind. A hawk drew a line across the sky that I couldn't see until he showed it to me. I climbed a low hill behind the house and could see for miles, the world drawn in long, quiet strokes. Somewhere out there, a fence line wavered, the barbed wire, silver posts leaning and righting themselves as if in conversation. On the second afternoon, a truck rolled up and coughed to a stop, and a woman stepped out, the brim of her hat shading eyes that were used to open spaces. She was in her 60s, I guessed, with weathered hands and a loose braid of gray hair down her back. She stuck out her hand. "May Caldwell," she said. "My place is the next one down the line. Wanted to see who moved in." I shook her hand. She had a grip like a vice and a smile that arrived slowly, like it wanted to be sure it was welcome. "Brooks," I said. "Anderson." "Ah," she said. "Joseph's grandson. He was a quiet one. He let his fences talk. Fences tell you what kind of man you are. His were true until they couldn't be. Came a bad winter, came debts like weeds. We all got debts. He kept the place anyway. Didn't speak much on it." She looked over my shoulder at the house, at the porch and the patched roof line, and the window that begged for new glass. "If you need a ladder," she said, "I've got one." I offered her coffee and she accepted, and we sat at the table. Like we were expected to, as if the house had drawn chairs for us long ago. I told her I was figuring out what this place was. She nodded, considering me. "There's folks who will tell you to sell," she said. "Don't listen to the first one. Listen to the land. It has a way of answering if you sit still long enough." "Do people listen?" I asked. "Not much," she said, and then smiled. But sometimes, when she left, she said, "If you see a fawn on your place this spring, don't touch it. Leave it be. What looks like trouble, sometimes what's supposed to happen." I thought about Ellen calling me weak and didn't know what to do with the way the memory and May's words sat side by side. In the days that followed, I learned the house by heart. I learned which step sighed when a person stepped on it, which window bore the morning light on its shoulder, how the afternoon wind found the crack in the porch door. I measured the rooms with rope and pencil marks on the floor, made lists in the margin of a notebook, and then crossed things off and rewrote them. I found, wrapped in tissue paper beneath the Morning Star quilt, a small notebook with an address in South Dakota, a cultural center, a woman's name. I hesitated, then dialed. "Hello?" said a steady voice on the second ring. "Is this the cultural center?" I asked, and when she said yes, I told her my name, told her I had found a notebook with this address among my grandfather's things. I did not say Lakota first. I did not claim anything. I said my grandfather had been connected in ways I wanted to understand, and I didn't know where to begin. The woman, who introduced herself as Angela, didn't rush me. "You can come visit," she said. "We prefer it when people talk to people and not to the internet. But if you can't, we can talk again on the phone. We can tell you what's ours to tell. We can't give you what isn't ours to give." "That's fair," I said. And I meant it. Set a time for me to drive out the following week. I spent that evening at the table with the trunk's letters. One was from my mother in her small, neat hand. "Brooks," she wrote, "I know you will feel like we were unfair. You left Spencer the house because he needs something finished. He needs something he can hold up and say, 'I did this.' We left you Montana because you were always going to go looking inward anyway. You are a listener. Your grandfather saw it when you were little and would sit on the stoop with him for an hour without saying a word, told us then. This one belongs to quiet places. That didn't mean we loved you toward loneliness. It meant we wanted you to have a place to meet yourself. It also meant we wanted you to have the chance to decide how to carry the part of us that wasn't said out loud. I think you'll do it with care. I love you so much, Mom." I rested my forehead on the table. Ranger pressed his head against my leg as if he knew sorrow had slipped inside. I cried in that quiet, strange house in a way I hadn't cried. At the funeral, the tears a slow, stubborn river. When they were done, I felt emptied and steadied both. 2 days later, black SUV pulled into the yard like a city man in a Western movie. The driver's door swung open, and a tall man with hair too perfect for this wind stepped out, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He stuck out his hand as he approached, smile white and wide. "Royce Beck," he said. "Beck Holdings, I heard you were in town. Figured I'd come by and make you an offer. Time is money. Don't like to waste either." He said my first name like he already owned it. I didn't take his hand. I kept mine in my pockets so I wouldn't clench them. "I'm not selling," I said. "You've got a lot of land for a man who lives in Nebraska," he said easily, like he was balancing a coin on his knuckles. "And you've got taxes coming and upkeep you can't handle. This is bad optics for you. Let me take this headache off your hands." My temper nudged me in the ribs, asked if it could have a turn at the front. I kept it in the back row. "Did you know I was here?" I asked. "Doris at the county office," he said, shrugging. "Small towns talk." "I'm not here to trick you, Brooks. I'll cut you a check that gives you freedom to do what you want, and I'll take care of this old place. I'll make it into something special. Hunting lodge, maybe a boutique retreat. That creek sings money. Can keep your memories. You can keep a quilt. I'll take the land." Thought unbidden of the words in my grandfather's letter. There are people to whom this place matters, and people who will tell you it does not. I looked at Beck. His eyes were on me. I wondered if he had ever listened to a creak. "No," I said. "Thank you for your time." He didn't leave. Tilted his head like I'd made an amusing error. "You're going to hold out for more?" "I can do a little more. I'll say an extra 50 grand for your trouble. Okay, and you can keep a slice on the creek to come fish when you miss the place." I shook my head. "It's not for sale." Behind me on the wall, the Morningstar quilt didn't move. The photographs didn't move. But I felt them like I felt the sun on the back of my neck. Beck's smile thinned, like it was cutting weight. "Think about it," he said. Oh man. "Like you needs to be practical. A man like your brother, he understands value. Maybe he'll help you get there." The name landed in the air between us with a slight sting. He'd spoken to Spencer. I didn't like the word he'd used, value, not because it was wrong, but because it barely counted as the beginning of meaning. After he left, the air felt long and flat. I called Mr. Wilkins, the lawyer, and told him what had happened. He sighed, a long, slow sound that I had started to recognize as something adults do when the world repeats itself. "Your father anticipated this," he said. "There's a clause he had me place in a trust document which your grandfather created and he amended. It's about as clear as we could make it. This property cannot be sold to an entity outside a family or to a recognized tribal land trust without the trustee's full consent. At the moment, you're the trustee." "Without my consent?" I said softly. "That's right," Wilkins said. Your father knew Spencer would sell in a heartbeat if it meant getting a bigger truck. Trusted you to think longer. That night, Ellen called. The sight of her name on my screen made my stomach twist. I answered anyway. You still there? She said, skipping hello. How long do you plan to play pioneer? I found things, I said. Letters. Papers. Land. Oh, the land, she said sharply. We have a mortgage. We had a plan. Can't just bolt and find yourself in some old farmhouse like you're in a movie. You're a banker, Brooks. Be that. I don't know what I'm supposed to. Be yet, I said, and it surprised me that I could say it aloud. But whatever it is, I think it starts here. You won't fight for what's fair for us, but you'll fight for a creek, she asked. Her voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly I heard the fear that had been hiding behind her anger. You left me, she said quietly. Left me to decide what to make for dinner, and how to fix the bathroom light, and whether we can afford whatever comes next. You left? I know, I said. The admission was a relief and a wound in one. I'll make sure you have what you need. I'll be honest about what I can do and what I can't. I just can't be someone else anymore. Not for you, not for Spencer. Maybe not even for Mom and Dad. I told her about the trust, about the savings bonds, about the letters that had pressed something awake in me. There was a long silence. And what does this make me? She asked finally. Someone who deserves more than a man who has been a ghost in his own life, I said. I'm going to do something with this place, if you want to be part of it. I would be honored. If you don't, I will understand. I won't force you either way. She exhaled. When you were 25, she said, we talked about running away to the ocean, remember? We hurried because we thought life was short. It is. You took too long to pick a wave, and I took any wave that came. Maybe we both made mistakes. She paused. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. Take care of yourself. After the call, the house felt very still. I turned off the lamps and went outside. The sky at night here made me feel like a secret had been revealed, and I wasn't sure I was allowed to keep it. Ranger trotted at my side, a shadow attached to my shadow. I lay on my back in the grass and let my eyes adjust until I could pick out not just the big ones. You learn as a kid, but the tiny ones that felt like punctuation marks in some long poem I didn't know how to read. I thought about my grandfather, painting stars on the back of his eyelids. I thought about my father counting out taxes and sleeping next to a woman who believed in quiet love as strongly as she believed in words. The next week, I drove to South Dakota. The cultural center was bright and practical, a place meant to be used, not admired from a distance. Angela met me at the door and took my measure in a glance that felt like it included the land I'd left that morning. I brought photographs and the small notebook and asked my questions carefully. No, I did not ask for stories that weren't mine to hold. I asked for help, understanding what I could do that would be respectful and real. Angela looked at the photograph of my grandfather and nodded. He used to come through, she said. Quiet man. He brought donations sometimes. And information we needed worked on a ranch, had a foot in two rooms like so many of our people do. He didn't bring everything he knew. That happens, but he did more than some. He didn't forget which matters. I told her about the trust clause and the possibility of involving a tribal land trust. There are land-back efforts, she said. Some tribes run programs, some work through nonprofits that center indigenous-led priorities. If you're serious, we can connect you. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can create a conservation easement that protects particular places on the land. You can do access agreements. You can think out loud with people who will hold you accountable. Do it with integrity. Do it in partnership. I will, I said, and I meant it in a way that felt like a vow. I asked what support would look like and wrote down everything she said. Before I left, she slid a small card into my hand. Is the number for a friend who works in Montana? She said. She's good. She'll tell you the truth. When I drove back that afternoon, the land looked like a new thing and an old friend at the same time. I took a side road and pulled off at a rise. From there, I could see the strip of cottonwoods marking the creek like a vein in the roofline. Of the house peeking through, felt hungry in a way that had little to do with food. I called a carpenter I'd met at the hardware store. His name was Nate, with steady hands and a daughter named June, who was 12 and liked to draw horses in the air with her finger while her dad talked. He helped me shore up the porch, replace the cracked window, fix a leak in the roof, and left me with a list of things I could do myself if I had patience and strong coffee. Spencer arrived, of course. He slid into the yard a week later, leaning against the hood of his car like he had a right to the angle the sun made off the windshield. "So this is the mystery house," he said, and whistled low. "Pretty ugly, it's beautiful," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me like I'd said the sky was green, walked around the place, hands in pockets, and I realized he was doing math again, looking for angles, imagining a blueprint. He stopped at the porch and turned to me. "Beck says he made you an offer, and you turned it down," he said. "Are you insane?" I looked at my brother and saw him as if for the first time in years. Not as the boy who took what he wanted or the man who ran faster than he could think, but as someone standing in front of me with something like panic hiding behind his smirk. "Why do you need it so bad?" I asked quietly. "The money?" He flinched. "I don't," he said too quickly, then sighed, then gave up the lie with a shrug that looked like defeat. "I may have taken out a HELOC on Mom and Dad's place before the paperwork settled," he said. "I thought I could flip it fast and get ahead. I was going to pay it back, I swear. But then the roof needed replacing, and the contractor, he's my friend. He gave me a good deal, but good deals are still money, you know?" I stared at him. "Spencer," I said. And he laughed and derived more bravado from the sound. "I know," he said. "I screwed up. Surprise, surprise. But we can fix it if you sell this. You've always been the fixer." I thought of what Ellen had said about me never fighting. I thought of the letters. I thought of the river at night that looked like a ribbon of light through the sky, and I felt something like a root thicken in me. "No," I said gently. "I'm not selling. We're brothers," he said, each word sharper than the one before. "We stick together. We do," I said. "That's why I'm not going to let you ruin yourself by taking the easy way out again. We'll help. You look at the numbers. We'll make a plan. We'll sell the Lincoln house if we have to, but we'll do it right.
Wow.
No developer is going to pick our bones clean because you're scared." He stared at me like he didn't know where I'd gone. Then he laughed, but there wasn't much joy in it. "Who are you?" he asked. "Brooks," I said. "Always have been." He left in a spray of gravel, but he called me 3 days later. "I'm in trouble," he said. No humor left. "They're calling. They'll take the house." I drove back to Lincoln for 2 days that felt like 10, spread papers on the kitchen table at our parents' house, and used every skill I had. I negotiated. I got extensions. I called in a favor from a man who owed my father $3 for fixing his car. In a snowstorm, we sold the house not to Beck, who came sniffing around, but to a family who walked the rooms with careful steps like they knew they were stepping into someone else's life. It hurt. I can't pretend it didn't. Mom's hummingbird feeder looked like someone had stopped a clock. Dad's tools went to a friend. Spencer signed papers with a shaky hand, and I watched a little boy in him finally catch up to his body and sit down. He cried like a man, quietly and with no hiding, and we hugged each other hard in the driveway, like we were trying to anchor ourselves to something that held. Ellen met me for coffee on my way back west. We looked at each other like two people who had married because they loved each other and had remained together because they were afraid not to. I told her the truth, all of it. She told me she was going to find an apartment, and she thought she might go back to school to study something. That had always mattered to her. "We were a steady ship," she said, stirring a cup she didn't drink. "We anchored in the wrong harbor is all. We wished each other kindness, and then, because we had been kind, said goodbye." Back in Montana, I kept working. I called Angela's friend, who introduced me to a small, indigenous-led land trust working in the region. We sat at my kitchen table and talked about what a partnership might look like. We drew up papers that put a conservation easement on part of the land, protecting the creek and a low hill with a circle of stones that had been there longer than any memory in our family. Not to claim anything sacred for ourselves, but to ensure no one would bulldoze a place that mattered. We created an agreement for scheduled community access guided by the trust, especially for youth, so people could be on the land in a way that respected it. The savings bonds I'd found in my grandfather's trunk went into repairs and into a small scholarship fund for local kids to go to college or trade school, something that felt like a real use of money, not an apology for having it. Nate's daughter, June, drew a sign for me on a piece of wood. Quiet River House. We put it by the gate that didn't lock. People came, not crowds, not tourists with selfie sticks, but people who wanted to listen and look at the sky at night. Kids whose eyes went wide when they saw how many stars lived above their heads, and old men who put their hands on the fence posts like they were remembering how to stand. May came by with a pie that had more berries than logic allowed and told me to pace myself. I tried Spencer visited in late summer, a humble light in his eyes I'd never seen. He touched the fence like it might bite him, and then smiled when it didn't. "This place is who you are," he said. And he didn't sound like a man angling for a share. I didn't get it. I think I do now. "You're welcome here," I said. He nodded and looked up at the sky like he'd been told he could keep something after all.